Good evening, and welcome back to another relaxing story of survival. Tonight, we're going to explore something different. Something that rumbles through empty highways under moonlit skies. A fortress on wheels. A home that never stops moving. Tonight, we follow 5 survivors who turned a forgotten school bus into their salvation during the end of the world. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, if the dead rose tomorrow, what vehicle would you choose to survive in? Would you fortify a bus like our travelers tonight? Or would you choose something else entirely? And don't forget to like the video if you enjoy what we do here, and subscribe for more survival stories that help you drift into another world. Now, settle in, dim the lights, let the hum of distant engines carry you away. Chapter 1. The Last Safe Place. The world ended on a Tuesday. You remember that because Tuesdays were always slow, quiet, predictable. But on that particular Tuesday, the news broke through every screen, every radio, every whispered conversation in grocery store aisles. A sickness, fast-moving, incurable. And worse, it didn't let you stay dead. The 5 of you met by accident, or maybe by fate. There was Jackson, the driver. 42 years old, with hands that never shook and eyes that could read a road in total darkness. He'd driven coaches across state lines for 15 years. He knew every highway, every back route, every forgotten strip of asphalt in 3 states. Then came Nina, the mechanic. Small, wiry, with grease permanently under her fingernails and an instinct for engines that bordered on supernatural. She could hear a failing belt from 30 feet away. She spoke to machines in a language only they understood. There was Elliot, the medic. Soft-spoken, methodical, always carrying a canvas bag full of supplies he'd grabbed from the clinic before it burned. He'd been a paramedic for 8 years. He knew how to keep people breathing when the world wanted them to stop. Kenji had been a forest ranger before everything collapsed. He knew plants, weather patterns, animal behavior. He could navigate by stars and find water where others saw only dust. He moved through the world like he was still part of it, even as it fell apart. And then there was Rachel. Army veteran turned restaurant manager. She'd served 2 tours overseas, then came home and learned to manage chaos of a different kind. Inventory, schedules, people. She kept order when everything else dissolved into panic. You found each other in a high school parking lot 3 weeks after the outbreak began. The school had been a shelter, briefly, then it became a trap. The 5 of you were the ones who made it out, and you took the bus. Chapter 2. The Machine Awakens. The bus was a 997 Bluebird, 39 feet long, diesel engine, yellow paint fading to rust in places. It had been retired from service 2 years earlier, left to rot behind the school's maintenance shed. But Jackson saw potential. Nina saw a project. Rachel saw strategy. The dead were slow that first week, shambling, confused. But they were everywhere. Cities became graveyards. Suburbs became hunting grounds. The survivors who stayed in one place didn't stay alive for long. The bus was mobility. The bus was shelter. The bus was everything. You worked through the first night by flashlight in sheer desperation. Nina crawled underneath with a toolbox and a prayer. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The sound echoed across the empty parking lot like thunder. For a moment you thought it would draw them, but the school was already overrun. A few more dead wouldn't change anything. Jackson took the wheel. Rachel called out directions from a road atlas she'd found in the principal's office. Kenji watched the horizon. Elliot checked supplies. Nina rode in the engine compartment, one hand on the hood, feeling every vibration, listening for trouble. You drove through the night. You drove through towns where bodies littered the streets. You drove past burning houses and overturned cars and survivors who screamed for help but were already surrounded. You couldn't stop. Stopping meant dying. By dawn, you were 50 miles away. By the end of the second day, you'd left the city behind entirely. And somewhere in those hours, the five of you made an unspoken agreement. You would keep moving. You would survive. And you would do it together. Chapter 3. The Ark Takes Shape. The bus became your project, your purpose, your hope. You found an abandoned warehouse on the third day. Industrial district, far from the main roads. The dead were sparse here, drawn to population centers like moths to flame. You pulled the bus inside and sealed the doors behind you. Nina immediately began stripping out the seats. Rows and rows of green vinyl benches bolted to the floor. They came out one by one, creating space, creating possibility. Rachel organized the supplies. Canned goods from a raided supermarket, bottled water, first aid kits, weapons, a hunting rifle, 2 handguns, a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire, a fire axe. Not much, but more than nothing. Kenji scouted the perimeter. He found a loading dock with a clear view of the approach roads. He found a water source, a rain gutter system that could be diverted into containers. He found weak points and ways to reinforce them. Elliot set up a medical station in what used to be the rear emergency exit area. Clean bandages, antiseptic, painkillers, a suture kit. Everything he'd need if someone got hurt. And someone always got hurt. Jackson never left the driver's seat for long. He studied maps, calculated fuel consumption, planned routes. He was already thinking 3 days ahead, 3 tanks ahead, 3 towns ahead. The bus wasn't just a vehicle anymore, it was becoming something else. You worked for 5 days straight. 5 days of welding and hammering and cutting and bolting. Nina found sheet metal in the warehouse, old roofing panels, ductwork, scraps from construction projects that would never be finished. She welded them to the sides of the bus, overlapping like scales on a dragon. She reinforced the front with a steel plow fashioned from a wrecked truck's bumper. Kenji and Rachel scavenged road signs from the highway. Stop signs, yield signs, speed limit markers, anything metal. They bolted them to the exterior, creating a patchwork armor that gleamed dully in the warehouse's dim light. The windows were the biggest vulnerability. Glass shatters. Glass lets things in. You covered them with wire mesh and metal grates, leaving narrow slits for visibility. The bus became a fortress. Dark inside. Protected. But it also became something else. It became home. Chapter 4. The lights inside. Rachel found the Christmas lights on the 6th day. She'd been searching through the warehouse office, looking for tools, when she opened a supply closet. Inside were boxes of decorations, tinsel, ornaments, and 3 long strands of white Christmas lights still in their packaging. She brought them back to the bus without saying anything, strung them along the interior ceiling, duct-taped to the metal framework. Plugged them into the bus's auxiliary power, a small generator Nina had rigged from salvaged car batteries. When she flipped the switch, the inside of the bus transformed. Soft, white light filled the space. Gentle, warm. Not bright enough to be seen from outside, but enough to push back the darkness. Enough to make it feel less like a military vehicle and more like a place where people lived. Elliot smiled. Kenji nodded appreciatively. Nina laughed, actually laughed, for the first time since the world ended. Jackson looked back from the driver's seat and said, "That's good. That's really good." From that moment on, the bus wasn't just armor and engine and survival strategy. It was a place of small comforts, small dignities. You added more over the following days. A curtain made from a bedsheet, dividing the sleeping area from the front. A small bookshelf built from scrap wood, holding a handful of paperbacks someone had grabbed from a library. A battery-powered radio that mostly played static but occasionally caught a distant signal. You found camping mats and sleeping bags. You arranged them in 2 rows along the floor where the seats used to be. 5 beds. 1 for each of you. Not comfortable exactly, but yours. Nina hung a small mirror near the medical station. Elliot organized his supplies into labeled containers. Kenji kept a journal documenting each day's travel and observations. Rachel maintained the weapons, cleaning them every evening by the light of a headlamp. Jackson kept a photograph taped to the dashboard. His daughter. She'd been visiting her mother in another state when everything collapsed. He didn't talk about her. But the photo stayed there, always. The bus became more than survival. It became memory. It became the small things that reminded you that you were still human. Chapter 5. The first night drive. You learned quickly that night was your friend. The dead were drawn to movement and sound during the day. But at night, they became slower, more confused. Their senses dulled. They wandered without direction, stumbling through darkness that didn't bother them but didn't guide them either. Jackson preferred to drive at night. The roads were clearer, fewer abandoned cars, fewer obstacles. The moon lit the way better than you expected, especially on cloudless nights, and the hum of the diesel engine, steady and low, became a lullaby rather than a beacon. You drove through farmland under a sky full of stars, past fields that had once grown corn and wheat, now growing wild, past barns that leaned dangerously ready to collapse, past farmhouses with dark windows and doors left open. Kenji kept watch from the top of the bus. Nina had cut a hatch in the roof during the warehouse days, reinforced it with hinges and a locking mechanism. Kenji would climb up with the hunting rifle and position himself behind a low wall of welded metal. From there, he could see in every direction. He could spot danger long before it reached you. The first night drive was quiet, almost peaceful. Rachel sat in the seat directly behind Jackson, reading a book by flashlight. Elliot dozed in the back, his medical bag serving as a pillow. Nina lay on her sleeping mat, eyes closed, one hand resting on the bus's metal floor as if checking its pulse. You watched the landscape slide past through the narrow window slits. Trees became shadows. Roads became rivers of pale concrete. The world felt emptier at night, less threatening, less real. Jackson drove for 6 hours straight. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His hands on the wheel were steady, confident. This was what he knew. This was where he belonged. When dawn began to break, he pulled off onto a logging road Kenji had spotted from the roof. You followed it deep into the woods, far from the highway until the trees closed in around you. Jackson killed the engine. The silence was sudden and complete. "We rest here today," he said quietly. "Tonight, we move again." And so the pattern began. Chapter 6. The rotation of sleep. Sleep became a carefully choreographed dance. You couldn't all rest at once. Someone had to watch. Someone had to listen. Someone had to be ready if the dead found you, or if other survivors approached with less than friendly intentions. Rachel created the schedule. 2-hour shifts. 3 people sleeping, 2 people awake. 1 watching outside, 1 monitoring the interior and maintaining the bus. Jackson took the first watch most nights. He would sit in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel even though the engine was off, eyes scanning the car, darkness beyond the windshield. He claimed he didn't need much sleep. Maybe that was true. Or maybe he just couldn't stop being the driver, even when there was nowhere to drive. Kenji preferred the dawn watch. He would climb to the roof as the sky began to lighten, settling into position with the rifle across his lap. He watched the forest come alive. Birds returning to song, deer moving through the underbrush. He could tell if the dead were nearby how the animals behaved. If the woods went silent, you had company. Nina took middle-of-the-night shifts. She would walk the perimeter of wherever you'd stopped, checking the bus's exterior, tightening bolts, looking for wear and damage. She carried a wrench in one hand and a knife in the other. She was protective of the bus in a way that went beyond mechanical interest. It was her creation, her responsibility. Elliot and Rachel rotated through the remaining shifts, flexible, adapting to whoever needed extra rest. Inside the bus during rest hours, the Christmas lights stayed on. Dimmed slightly to conserve battery, but never completely off. The soft glow created a space that felt separate from the world outside. Safer. Warmer. You would lie in your sleeping bag, listening to the breathing of the others. Elliot's slow, steady rhythm. Nina's occasional mumble as she dreamed. Rachel's complete stillness. She slept like a soldier, always half aware, ready to wake in an instant. Sometimes you could hear Jackson humming quietly from the driver's seat. Old songs. Highway songs. Trucker ballads about endless roads and places that didn't exist anymore. Sometimes you could hear Kenji on the roof, shifting his weight, the creak of metal under his boots. And sometimes in the deepest part of night, you could hear the dead. Distant moans carried on the wind, shambling footsteps on pavement, reminders that you were never truly alone. But inside the bus, wrapped in your sleeping bag, surrounded by people who watched over you, you felt something unexpected. You felt safe. Chapter 7. The Rules of the Road. Rachel kept a notebook. Black cover, spiral-bound. In it, she wrote down everything the group agreed upon. Rules. Protocols. Lessons learned the hard way. Rule 1. Never stop in population centers. Cities were death traps. Towns were only slightly better. The dead congregated where people used to be. You passed through quickly or avoided them entirely. Rule 2. Always have 2 escape routes. Jackson scouted ahead mentally, constantly evaluating where the bus could turn, where it could reverse, where it could break through if necessary. You never parked yourself into a corner. Rule 3. Conserve fuel obsessively. The bus had a 50-gallon tank. At roughly 6 miles per gallon, that meant 300 miles of range. But fuel was becoming scarce. Gas stations had been looted, destroyed, or were surrounded by the dead. Every gallon was precious. Rule 4. A scavenge smart, not desperate. You took what you needed, not everything you could carry. Weight mattered. Balance mattered. A heavy bus was a slow bus. Rule 5. Trust your specialists. When Nina said the engine needed rest, you rested. When Elliot said someone was injured, you stopped. When Kenji said something felt wrong, you listened. Everyone had their domain. Everyone's expertise kept you alive. Rule 6. No unnecessary noise. Generators only when needed. Conversations kept to low voices. Music only through headphones. The bus itself was relatively quiet for its size, but you never took chances. Rule 7. Check everything twice. Door latches, weapon safeties, medical supplies. Nina inspected the bus every morning. Rachel inventoried supplies every 3 days. Redundancy wasn't paranoia. It was survival. Rule 8. Shifts are sacred. If you had watch, you had watch. No falling asleep, no distractions. The group depended on each person doing their part. Always. Rule 9. Communicate clearly. In combat situations, in driving emergencies, in medical crises, clear, simple, direct. No assumptions. No implied meanings. Say what you mean. Rule 10. We move forward. No matter what happened, no matter who you lost, no matter how tired you became, the bus kept moving. Stillness was death. Movement was life. These rules weren't just guidelines, they were the framework that held the group together. They were the difference between survivors and victims, and everyone followed them. Chapter 8. The Fuel Run. 3 weeks into your journey, the gauge dropped below a quarter tank. You'd been avoiding it, rationing travel, taking longer rest periods. But eventually mathematics caught up with hope. You needed fuel. Jackson found a small town on the map, population 1,200, or it had been. Now it was probably empty. Probably. You approached at dawn, slow, cautious. The bus rumbled down Main Street with Kenji on the roof and Rachel in the passenger seat, rifle ready. The town was quiet. Too quiet. Storefronts with shattered windows, a diner with its door hanging open, a post office with mail scattered across the sidewalk, and in the center of town, a gas station. Jackson parked the bus across the street, engine running, ready to move. Nina grabbed the fuel cans and hose. Kenji kept watch from above. Rachel and Elliot would accompany Nina across the street. 5 minutes, Rachel said, in and out. They moved quickly. Rachel scanned windows and alleys. Elliot watched their backs. Nina worked the pump, trying to coax fuel from tanks that might be empty. The pump was dead. No power. But Nina had anticipated this. She opened the underground tank access and fed the hose down, using a manual pump to draw fuel up. It was slow. Painfully slow. That's when you heard them. Not moans. Footsteps, human footsteps. 3 people emerged from the diner across the street. 2 men, 1 woman, thin, dirty, armed with pipes and a crowbar. Their eyes locked on the bus. "That's a hell of a ride," one of the men called out. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "You folks looking to trade?" Rachel straightened slowly. "Not interested." "Didn't ask if you were interested," the man said. His companion spread out slightly, flanking. "That bus could hold a lot of people, a lot of supplies. Seems selfish, 5 people taking up all that space." Nina continued pumping fuel. She didn't look up, didn't stop. Jackson revved the engine once, a warning. The woman with the crowbar took a step forward. "We could do this the easy way, or..." Kenji's voice came from the roof, calm and clear. "I have a rifle pointed at your chest. The easy way is you walk away." The 3 survivors froze. They looked up, saw Kenji silhouetted against the morning sky, rifle aimed, steady as stone. The silence stretched for 5 long heartbeats. Then the man with the pipe laughed bitterly. "Hell of a world, isn't it?" They backed away slowly, disappeared into the diner. You didn't see them again. Nina finished filling the last can. Rachel and Elliot hustled back to the bus. Nina secured the fuel cans to the exterior storage racks. Everyone climbed aboard. Jackson didn't wait. The bus lurched forward, leaving the town behind. Nobody spoke for 10 miles. Chapter 9. The Modification. That night, while stopped in a grove of pine trees, the group held a meeting. "We got lucky," Rachel said. "Next time we might not." "The bus is tough," Nina added, "but it's not invincible." We need more. Kenji nodded from his position near the door. We need better visibility from the roof, better firing positions. Jackson turned in the driver's seat. We need it to look more dangerous. Right now, we look like a target. We should look like a threat. And so began the next phase of the bus's transformation. Over the following week, whenever you stopped, Nina worked. She welded spikes to the front bumper, rebar and sharpened metal pipes, angled forward like the tusks of some prehistoric beast. They weren't just for show. If the dead surrounded you, Jackson could push through without stopping. She reinforced the roof platform where Kenji kept watch, added short walls made from sheet metal and more road signs, creating a fighting position that offered cover from multiple angles. She installed metal loops where rifles could be secured or rotated quickly. Rachel and Elliot painted warnings on the sides of the bus. Simple, stark messages in white and red paint. Armed on one side. Keep distance on the other. Nothing elaborate. Just enough to make anyone think twice. Kenji fashioned a makeshift periscope from PVC pipe and angled mirrors. Installed it near Jackson's seat. Now the driver could see directly behind the bus without relying on mirrors alone. You added more external storage. Metal boxes welded to the sides. Lockable, waterproof. One for fuel cans, one for water containers, one for scavenged supplies. Everything tied down. Nothing loose, nothing that could rattle or fall. The bus grew uglier, more brutal, more apocalyptic. But it also grew more capable. When you finally finished, you all stood back and looked at what you'd created. It barely resembled a school bus anymore. It looked like something out of a fever dream, a war machine, a rolling fortress designed by desperation and ingenuity. Nina wiped her hands on a rag and smiled. Beautiful. Rachel walked around it slowly, inspecting every weld, every attachment. This'll do. Jackson climbed into the driver's seat and gripped the wheel. Let's see what she can do. You drove that night with new confidence. The bus handled differently now, heavier, more solid. The armor added weight, which meant slightly lower fuel efficiency. But it also meant protection, safety, intimidation. When other survivors saw you coming, they moved aside. When the dead stumbled into your path, Jackson didn't slow down. The reinforced front plowed through them like they were nothing. The bus had become exactly what you needed it to be. A weapon, a home, a promise that you would survive. Chapter 10. The radio signal. It happened on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after the fuel run. Elliot was fiddling with the radio during his watch, turning the dial slowly through static and silence. He did this sometimes when he couldn't sleep, searching for voices, for proof that others still existed. Most nights, there was nothing. But that night, a voice broke through the noise. Repeat, this is Haven calling any survivors. We are a secure community. We have shelter, food, medical supplies. If you can hear this, we are broadcasting from the coordinates. Elliot's hand froze on the dial. The voice was clear, calm, professional, a woman's voice. She repeated the message twice, gave GPS coordinates, then faded back into static. Elliot woke everyone immediately. You gathered around the radio like it was a campfire. Jackson wrote down the coordinates. Kenji pulled out a map. Rachel listened to the silence that followed, as if waiting for the message to repeat. Could be real, Nina said quietly. Could be a trap, Rachel countered. Could be hope, Elliot added. Jackson traced a route on the map. It's 200 miles northwest, 4 days if we're careful. The group fell silent. You'd been moving without a destination, surviving day by day. The bus had no endpoint, only the next mile, the next town, the next dawn. But now there was something else. A possibility, a place. "We vote," Rachel said. "That's how we do this." 5 hands went up, unanimous. You would find Haven, or you would find out it didn't exist. Either way, you needed to know. Chapter 11. The Journey Northwest. The landscape changed as you traveled northwest. Farmland gave way to foothills. Roads became narrower, windier. Towns grew smaller and farther apart. You rationed fuel carefully. Drove at night, when possible. Avoided main highways, sticking to county roads and forgotten routes that appeared on older maps, but not on newer ones. The dead were less frequent here. Population density had always been lower in these regions. The outbreak had spread from cities outward, and the rural areas had more time to react, to flee, to barricade themselves. But that also meant survivors. More of them. And not all were friendly. On the second day, you passed a checkpoint. Someone had blockaded a bridge with cars and barbed wire. Armed people watched from behind cover as the bus approached. Jackson slowed but didn't stop. One of them raised a rifle. Kenji stood up on the roof, visible. His own rifle in hand but pointed skyward, a signal. Armed but not hostile. The man at the checkpoint studied the bus for a long moment. Then he lowered his weapon and waved you through. You crossed the bridge in silence. Nobody spoke until you were a mile past. "Good people or desperate people?" Elliot asked. "Both," Rachel answered. On the third day, you found a small gas station that still had fuel in its underground tanks. You stopped in the early morning, quickly siphoned what you could, and left a note. Took 15 gallons, thank you. The bus. Nina thought it was silly to leave notes. Rachel thought it was important. "Maybe humanity's not dead yet," she said. You drove through a forest fire on the 4th night. Not a fresh fire, the burning had happened weeks or months ago. But smoke still rose from the charred landscape. Tree trunks stood like black skeletons against the dark sky. The road was clear, barely, ash and debris swept aside by wind and rain. Jackson navigated carefully, headlights cutting through the haze. The bus rolled through a graveyard of trees, and nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. When you emerged on the other side, the sky opened up. Stars appeared. The air smelled clean again. Kenji pointed from the roof. There. In the distance, on a hilltop, a light flickered, a single point of illumination in the darkness. It could be anything. A fire, a lantern, a trap, or it could be Haven. Jackson adjusted course. The bus turned toward the light, toward hope or disaster. You would know soon enough. Chapter 12. The Gates of Haven. You arrived at dawn. Haven sat on a plateau surrounded by natural cliffs on 3 sides. The only approach was a single road, winding upward through switchbacks. At the base of that road stood a gate, chain-link fence reinforced with sheet metal and wooden planks, guard towers on either side, though towers was generous. They were more like elevated platforms with crude roofs. 2 people with rifles watched the bus approach. Jackson stopped 50 feet from the gate, killed the engine. The silence felt heavy. One of the guards descended from the platform. A man in his 50s, gray beard, wearing a faded jacket that might have been military surplus. He carried his rifle casually, not aimed, but ready. "That's close enough," he called out. Rachel stepped out of the bus, hands visible, empty. "We heard your radio broadcast. We're looking for Haven." The guard studied her, studied the bus. took in the armor, the spikes, the road signs, the gun ports. "That's quite a vehicle. It's kept us alive," Rachel said. "How many are you?" "5. Armed?" "Yes." The guard nodded slowly. He turned and called up to his partner. They conferred briefly, voices too low to hear. Then he turned back. "Haven's a community. We don't let just anyone in, but we don't turn away good people either. You're welcome to stop here for a few days, rest, resupply. We'll see how it goes." "Fair enough," Rachel said. The gate opened. Jackson started the engine. The bus rolled forward slowly, carefully, passing through the gate and into Haven. What you saw took your breath away. The plateau was larger than it appeared from below. Maybe 50 acres, surrounded by makeshift walls and natural barriers. Inside, there were buildings. Some were permanent, old structures that had existed before the outbreak. A farmhouse, a barn, a few storage sheds. Others were newer, tents, trailers, structures built from salvaged materials. And people, dozens of them, maybe 70 or 80 survivors living together, working together. Children played in a cleared area near the barn. Someone was working in a garden plot. A group was reinforcing the wall on the eastern edge. Smoke rose from a communal cooking area. It looked like civilization. Small, fragile, but real. Jackson parked the bus near the barn. You all stepped out slowly, unsure, overwhelmed. A woman approached, 40s, dark hair pulled back, confident stride. She wore a radio clipped to her belt. The same voice from the broadcast. "Welcome to Haven," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Victoria. I help coordinate things around here." Rachel shook her hand. "I'm Rachel. This is Jackson, Nina, Kenji, and Elliot. We've been on the road for 5 weeks." Victoria smiled. "You're safe here. Come on, let me show you around." And for the first time in over a month, you allowed yourself to believe it might be true. Chapter 13. The first night in Haven. Haven had rules, structure, systems that worked. Victoria explained as she led you through the settlement. Everyone contributed. If you could work, you worked. Farming, scavenging runs, wall maintenance, medical care, kitchen duty, guard shifts. There was no currency, no hierarchy beyond basic organization. Just cooperation. They had solar panels cobbled together from salvaged parts. A well that provided clean water. Gardens growing vegetables. Chickens, somehow. And a community mindset that prioritized the group over the individual. "We're not perfect," Victoria admitted. "We've lost people. We've had conflicts, but we're still here. That counts for something." She showed you the sleeping quarters, a converted barn with partitioned spaces, each with basic beds and storage. "You can stay here, or you can sleep in your bus. Most people prefer the barn, but I understand if you're attached to your vehicle." Nina immediately said, "We'll stay with the bus." Victoria nodded, understanding. "Fair enough. You've earned that." That night, you parked the bus in its designated spot and assessed the situation. "It seems legitimate," Elliot said. "I checked their medical setup. It's basic but functional. They know what they're doing." "The walls are solid," Kenji added. "Natural defenses are excellent. The approach is defendable." "People seem genuine," Rachel said. "But we stay cautious. We don't know them yet." Jackson sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel out of habit. "We stay ready to leave. If something feels wrong, we go." Nina was already underneath the bus, checking for damage from the journey. "Engine's good. We can move any time." You settled in for the night inside the bus, Christmas lights glowing softly. Outside, Haven's cooking fires dimmed. Voices faded. The community settled into sleep. But inside your mobile fortress, you kept a rotation. Rachel took first watch, not because you didn't trust Haven, but because trust was something you'd learned to ration as carefully as fuel. And maybe, just maybe, the bus had become more than transportation, more than shelter. It had become home. Chapter 14. The Integration. You stayed in Haven for a week, not because you had to, but because something unexpected happened. You became useful. Nina's mechanical skills were invaluable. Haven had vehicles, trucks, cars, an old tractor, but they were constantly breaking down. Nina spent her days in Haven's makeshift garage, teaching others, fixing engines, extending the life of machines that kept the community running. Elliot worked with Haven's medic, a retired nurse named Patricia. Together, they treated everything from infected cuts to broken bones to chronic conditions that had gone unmanaged for weeks. They shared knowledge, built protocols, saved lives. Kenji joined the scouting teams. His wilderness experience, his ability to navigate and track, made him perfect for supply runs. He could find resources others missed. He could read terrain and weather. He kept people safe. Rachel integrated with the security teams. She helped reorganize the guard rotations, trained people in basic combat tactics, reinforced defensive positions. Her military background gave structure to what had been improvised chaos. Jackson struggled. He wasn't needed as a driver here. Haven didn't move. For a man who'd spent his life in motion, who'd found purpose in the constant forward momentum of the bus, staying still felt wrong. He spent his time maintaining the bus, checking systems that didn't need checking, planning routes you weren't taking. At night, he would sit in the driver's seat staring out at nothing. On the fifth night, Victoria approached him. "You okay?" she asked. Jackson didn't answer immediately. Then, "I don't know how to stop moving." Victoria nodded. "Some people are like that. My husband was the same way. Always had to be going somewhere, doing something. Drove me crazy." "What happened to him?" "He died in the first week. Went back for supplies. Didn't come back." She said it matter-of-factly, no emotion left. But I remember what he said once. He said, "Sometimes the bravest thing is to stand your ground instead of running." Jackson considered this. We weren't running, we were surviving. "Maybe both," Victoria said. She placed a hand on his shoulder briefly, then walked away. That night, Jackson slept in the barn instead of the bus, just to see what it felt like. He didn't sleep well, but he slept. Chapter 15. The Decision. On the 8th day, the group met inside the bus after dinner. The Christmas lights created their familiar glow. Outside, Haven continued its evening routines, but inside, you faced a question: stay or go? "Haven's good," Nina said. "Real. These people know what they're doing. We could help them. They could help us." "Agreed," Elliot added. "The medical resources alone make this worthwhile, and Patricia's teaching me things I didn't know." Kenji was quiet for a moment. Then, "The location's defensible. Natural resources are adequate. If anywhere's going to last long-term, it's a place like this." Rachel nodded slowly. "I've been thinking the same thing, but..." "But what?" Nina asked. "But we've built something too," Rachel said, gesturing around the bus. "This, us. We work together. We trust each other. That's rare. And if we stay here, we become part of something bigger. That's good. But we also lose what made us us." Jackson finally spoke. "The bus is freedom. Haven is stability. can't have both. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Everyone here had lost something. Family, friends, old lives. The bus and this group had become the replacement. Your new family, your purpose. And giving that up, even for something good, felt like another loss. "We vote," Rachel said quietly. "But whatever we decide together." Nina went first. "I vote we stay, for now. See how it goes. We can always leave if things change." Elliot, "Stay. Haven needs doctors, needs people who know medicine." Kenji, "Stay. Winter's coming. The bus won't survive prolonged cold weather travel. Not easily." Rachel, "Stay. Conditionally. We keep the bus ready. We maintain our independence, but we give this a real chance." Jackson was last. Everyone looked at him. He took a long breath. "I vote we stay. But the bus stays ours. Nobody else drives it. Nobody else touches it. It's our insurance policy." It was unanimous. You would stay in Haven, but the bus, your fortress, your home, your escape, would remain ready. Always fueled, always maintained, always prepared for the moment when movement became necessary again. Some things you don't give up, even for safety. Chapter 16. Winter's Approach. The first snow fell 3 weeks later. Soft, gentle flakes that dusted Haven's plateau like powdered sugar. Beautiful. Peaceful. But also a warning. Winter in the mountains was serious. Haven began preparations immediately. You helped where you could. Rachel worked with the construction teams, reinforcing buildings against wind and cold. Elliot and Patricia stockpiled medical supplies, knowing injuries would increase when ice made everything treacherous. Nina worked on winterizing vehicles, including the bus. She installed a block heater scavenged from a dead truck, allowing the diesel engine to start in freezing temperatures. She reinforced the bus's insulation, adding foam panels and salvaged blankets between the metal exterior and the interior walls. Kenji joined hunting parties, bringing back deer and elk before the snows grew too deep. Meat was salted, smoked, preserved. Every calorie would matter when fresh food became impossible. Jackson helped where he could, but you could see him growing restless again. He would walk the perimeter of Haven, staring out at the roads below, at the horizon beyond. One evening, Victoria found him at the edge of the plateau. "Still thinking about leaving?" she asked. "Always," Jackson admitted. "Can't help it. It's who I am." "The roads will be impassable soon," Victoria said. "Ice, snow. The bus is tough, but it's not invincible." "I know." "So you'll stay through winter?" Jackson nodded. "Yeah, but come spring, you do what you need to do," Victoria said. "Nobody's a prisoner here. That's not what we're about." Jackson appreciated that. The freedom to leave made staying feel less like a cage. The snow continued to fall. Chapter 17. The First Blizzard. The blizzard hit Haven in mid-December. It came fast, a wall of white that descended from the mountains with startling fury. Visibility dropped to nothing. Wind howled through the gaps in buildings. Temperature plummeted to near zero. Haven locked down. Everyone moved indoors. Fires were fed constantly. People huddled together for warmth. Your group stayed in the bus. Nina had prepared for this. The insulation worked better than expected. The bus's heater, connected to the battery system, kept the interior livable. The Christmas lights stayed on, providing both illumination and a strange, warm comfort. You slept in shifts, as always. But now, it was less about security and more about maintaining the heater, monitoring carbon monoxide levels, ensuring everyone stayed warm. Outside, snow piled against the bus's sides. Drifts climbed higher, nearly covering the wheels. The windows frosted over, creating patterns like frozen ferns. Inside, wrapped in sleeping bags, you told stories. Elliot talked about his first day as a paramedic. The terror, the adrenaline, the life he'd saved on a highway outside Memphis. Nina described growing up in her father's garage, learning engines before she learned algebra, the smell of motor oil and metal becoming her first language. Kenji spoke of the forests he'd patrolled, the wildlife he'd protected, the quiet solitude that had prepared him, somehow, for this louder solitude of survival. Rachel shared stories from her deployments, not the combat, just the small moments. Sharing coffee with soldiers from other countries, watching sunrises over deserts, the strange friendships forged in impossible places. Jackson talked about highways, the poetry of asphalt stretching toward horizons, the truck stops and diners, the people he'd met who existed only in motion, just like him. The blizzard lasted 3 days. When it finally broke, Haven emerged from shelter to find a transformed world. Everything white, everything silent. The dead, if any had been near, were buried or frozen. The bus sat like a small mountain in the snow. You dug it out together, the whole group working in the bright, cold sunshine. When you finally cleared the door and stepped inside, the Christmas lights flickered on. Still home, still yours, still ready. Chapter 18, The Midwinter Patrol. In January, Kenji proposed an idea. "We should scout beyond Haven," he said during a community meeting. "See what's out there. Check nearby towns for supplies. Look for other survivors." Victoria was hesitant. "Travel in winter is dangerous. We've lost people that way. Which is why we should send the bus," Rachel added. "It's mobile, armored. We could cover ground that would take weeks on foot." The community debated. Some argued it was too risky. Others pointed out that spring would bring its own challenges. The dead becoming more active. Other survivor groups potentially becoming hostile. Resources running low. Finally, Victoria agreed. 1 trip, 1 week. You bring back intelligence and, if possible, supplies. But if conditions worsen, you turn back immediately. Your group prepared the bus. Nina gave it a complete inspection. Jackson plotted a route, a circuit that would take you to 3 small towns within a 50-mile radius, then back to Haven. Kenji packed cold weather gear. Elliot assembled a mobile medical kit. Rachel checked weapons and ammunition. You left on a clear morning, temperatures just below freezing. Haven's gates opened, and the bus rolled out onto snow-packed roads. The world in winter was hauntingly beautiful. Trees heavy with snow, fields of white stretching to distant horizons. Abandoned cars and houses buried in drifts, transformed into abstract sculptures. And the dead, frozen where they'd fallen. Not moving, not moaning, just standing statues in whatever position they'd been in when the cold finally stopped them. You reached the first town by afternoon. Population 800. Main Street lined with small shops and a grocery store. You found the grocery store picked clean, as expected. But the hardware store next door still had supplies. Hand tools, nails, wire, things Haven could use. Nina hot-wired a snowplow attachment from a truck and fastened it to the bus's front. Now you could clear roads if needed. The second town yielded medical supplies from a clinic. Antibiotics, painkillers, bandages. Elliot nearly cried with relief. The third town was different. Chapter 19. The Frozen Community. The third town was called Ridgemont. Population 1,200. You approached cautiously as always, but something felt wrong immediately. The town was too organized, too preserved. Buildings stood intact, windows unbroken. Streets were clear of debris, no signs of looting or chaos. Jackson stopped the bus at the town's entrance. Kenji scanned from the roof. "I see people," Kenji said quietly. "Living people. In the windows." A moment later, a group emerged from the town hall. 6 people armed with rifles and handguns. They didn't aim at you, but the message was clear. A woman at the front stepped forward. "That's far enough." Rachel exited the bus, hands visible. "We're just passing through, scouting for a community north of here." "Haven," the woman said. It wasn't a question. Rachel tensed. "You know about Haven?" "We know about a lot of things," the woman said. "We've been monitoring the area. Haven's broadcast reached us weeks ago." "You didn't respond," Rachel noted. "We don't advertise our presence." The woman gestured to the town behind her. "Ridgemont survived because we sealed ourselves off early. Nobody in, nobody out. We've got our own system." "Seems to be working," Rachel said carefully. "It is." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Look, we're not hostile, but we're also not looking for new people. We're full, stocked, stable. Best thing for both of us is if you move on peacefully." Rachel nodded slowly. "Understood. We don't want trouble." "Good." The woman paused. "But I'll give you this. About 40 miles west of here, there's a distribution warehouse, industrial park. We cleared it out months ago, but we couldn't carry everything. There's still food, supplies, equipment. If you're smart, you could fill that bus." "Why, tell us," Rachel asked. The woman shrugged. "Because not everyone has to be an enemy. Because maybe Haven's community will remember that Ridgemont helped them. Who knows? Maybe we'll need each other someday." She gave coordinates. Then she and her group returned to town. The doors closed. The windows went dark again. You stood there for a moment, processing. "That was..." Elliot trailed off. "Smart," Jackson finished. "They're survivors. Just like us, just different strategy." You followed the coordinates, found the warehouse exactly where the woman said it would be. It was a gold mine, pallets of canned goods, bottled water, industrial supplies, generators, tools, more than the bus could carry in one trip. You loaded carefully, prioritizing what Haven needed most. By the time you finished, the bus was packed to capacity. Jackson turned the bus toward home, toward Haven, and for the first time in months you felt like the world wasn't entirely full of enemies. Chapter 20. The Return. You arrived back at Haven on the 6th day, 1 day ahead of schedule. The gates opened immediately. Victoria and a crowd of community members waited. When they saw the loaded bus, when they saw the supplies stacked in every available space, a cheer went up. You unloaded everything together: canned vegetables, pasta, rice, batteries, propane tanks, medical supplies, seeds for spring planting, more than Haven had seen in months. That night, the community held a celebration, not lavish. Resources were still precious. But someone played a guitar, someone else sang. Food was shared. For a few hours, the apocalypse felt distant. Your group sat together near the bus, watching but not quite joining, still slightly apart. Still the people who lived in the armored fortress. Victoria approached with 2 cups of something hot. Coffee, real coffee, from the supplies you'd brought back. "You did good," she said, handing Jackson a cup. "Really good." Jackson accepted it, warming his hands. The warehouse was a lucky find. Luck is what you make of it, Victoria said. She looked at the bus, at the modifications, at the way it sat like a sleeping giant. You know, when you first arrived, I thought you'd leave within days. You seemed like people who don't stay put. We are those people, Jackson admitted. But you're still here. Winter, Jackson said simply. Then, after a pause, and maybe something else. Victoria smiled. Community has a way of getting under your skin, even for people who think they don't need it. Jackson didn't respond, but he didn't disagree either. Inside the bus, the Christmas lights glowed softly. Through the windows, you could see the others settling in for the night. Elliot organizing the medical supplies, Nina checking the engine one more time, Kenji cleaning his rifle, Rachel updating her notebook. Home. Still, always. Chapter 21. The thaw. Spring came slowly, reluctantly. Snow melted in incremental patches. Ice receded from roads and rooftops. Rivers swelled with runoff. The world emerged from winter's grip like something waking from hibernation. Haven began spring preparations. Gardens needed planting. Walls needed repair after winter's damage. The community expanded slightly, building new structures to house people more comfortably. Your group remained integral to Haven's operations. Nina became the head mechanic, training others, maintaining the small fleet of vehicles that kept the community mobile. Elliot and Patricia ran the medical station, treating everything from farming injuries to respiratory infections that had lingered through winter. Kenji led scouting missions, mapping the surrounding area, establishing supply routes, occasionally making contact with other survivor groups. Rachel coordinated security, creating protocols that kept Haven safe without making it feel like a prison camp. And Jackson trained drivers. He taught people how to handle vehicles in post-apocalyptic conditions, how to navigate blocked roads, how to reverse quickly, how to read terrain, how to keep a vehicle running when replacement parts no longer existed. He did this from the bus's driver's seat, because of course he did. But something had shifted in him. He was still a man of motion, still someone who looked at horizons with longing. But he'd found a way to be useful while staying still, at least for now. One evening in late March, Victoria called a community meeting. "We've been contacted by another settlement," she announced. "Place called Millbrook, about 80 miles south. They've proposed a trade agreement. We have medical expertise and mechanical skills. They have livestock and grain." Murmurs of interest rippled through the crowd. "They want to establish a regular supply route between our communities," Victoria continued, "which means that we need people willing to make that run. It's dangerous. The roads aren't always clear. The dead are becoming active again as the weather warms. But if we can make this work, both communities benefit significantly." Rachel glanced at Jackson. Jackson looked at the group. Nina smiled slightly. Elliot nodded. Kenji was already mentally planning the route. "We'll do it," Rachel said. Victoria wasn't surprised. "I figured you might. You leave in 3 days." The bus had been stationary for nearly 4 months. The longest it had stayed in one place since the outbreak began. But now the roads were calling again. And your group answered. Chapter 22. The trade route. You left Haven on a bright April morning. The bus rolled down the plateau road, through the gates, back onto highways that had been buried under snow for months. The world looked different in spring. Green was returning. Grass pushed through cracked pavement. Wildflowers bloomed in abandoned parking lots. The dead were more active too. You encountered them in clusters, drawn to sound, to movement, to some instinct that survived even death. But the bus, with its armor and reinforced front, pushed through them easily. Jackson didn't slow. Couldn't afford to. The route to Millbrook took you through territory you hadn't explored. Small towns, rural highways, forests that pressed close to the road. You stopped once at an abandoned rest area. Stretch your legs, check the bus, scavenge vending machines that still held preserved snacks. Kenji climbed to the roof to scout. Road ahead looks clear, but there's a bridge about 10 miles out, might be compromised. We'll assess when we get there, Rachel said. The bridge was still standing, but barely. The approach was littered with abandoned cars. Someone had tried to blockade it, then fled. The dead that had been trapped on the bridge were now frozen in place by time and decay. Jackson navigated carefully, weaving between obstacles, keeping the bus's weight distributed. The structure groaned beneath you. Everyone held their breath. You made it across, kept moving. Millbrook appeared on the horizon just before sunset. Smaller than Haven, maybe 40 people, built around an old farm with extensive fields. They had livestock, chickens, goats, even a few cows. Actual fresh food. Their leader was a man named Thomas, former farmer, now community organizer. He greeted you warmly, inspected the bus with obvious admiration. Haven said you were the real deal, Thomas said. They weren't exaggerating. You traded for 2 days. Medicine and mechanical expertise for grain, preserved meat, and live chickens secured in crates. You shared information about the area, warned about hostile groups, discussed routes and safety. On the 3rd morning, you began the return journey. The bus was heavier now, packed with supplies that would see Haven through several months. The chickens clucked nervously from their crates. The smell of livestock and grain filled the interior. It felt like purpose, like you were building something that mattered. Like maybe this new world wasn't just about survival anymore. Maybe it was about rebuilding. Chapter 23. The Ambush. You were 30 miles from Haven when it happened. The road narrowed through a forested section. Trees pressed close on both sides, limited visibility, limited maneuver room. Jackson sensed it first. Years of driving highways gave you an instinct for danger. "Something's wrong," he said quietly. Kenji was already on alert from the roof. Movement in the trees, both sides. The bus slowed. Rachel moved to the door, rifle ready. Elliot crouched near the medical station. Nina grabbed a wrench. Then the road ahead erupted. A van lurched out from the trees, blocking your path. Behind you, another vehicle, a truck, pulled across the road. Trapped. Men appeared from the forest. 8 of them, armed with rifles, shotguns, makeshift weapons. They looked desperate, thin, dangerous. A voice called out, "Stop the bus! We don't want to hurt anyone. We just need supplies." Jackson's hand hovered over the ignition. "We can break through the van." "People could die," Elliot said. "Ours or theirs. They made their choice when they set this trap," Rachel said coldly. But even she hesitated. The voice called again. "We have children. We're starving. Please." Kenji spoke from above. "I see kids in the trees. Looks like families." The group fell silent. This wasn't bandits. This was desperation. Nina suddenly spoke. "We negotiate." Rachel turned. "What?" "We give them something," Nina said. "Not everything, but something. We're not killers. Not unless we have to be." Elliot nodded immediately. "Agreed." Kenji called down, "I'm with Nina." Jackson looked at Rachel. "Your call, your security." Rachel closed her eyes briefly. Then, We give them food, limited amount. We keep the medicine, the livestock, but we don't leave them to starve. She opened the bus door and stepped out, rifle lowered but ready. We'll give you supplies, Rachel called out. But you lower your weapons first, and we talk. No tricks. A long pause. Then the man who'd been speaking stepped forward. He lowered his rifle. The others followed suit slowly, reluctantly. You negotiated for 10 minutes. Gave them canned goods, water, some basic supplies, not enough to cripple Haven, but enough to keep these people alive for a few more weeks. The man looked at the supplies with something like tears in his eyes. Thank you. You didn't have to do this. No, Rachel said quietly. But we're trying to be better than we have to be. The blockade cleared. The bus moved forward. Nobody spoke for 10 miles. Finally, Jackson said, "We did the right thing." "I hope so," Rachel answered. "I really hope so." Chapter 24. Haven's Growth. The trade route to Millbrook became regular. Once every 2 weeks you made the run. Supplies, information, building relationships between communities. Other settlements heard about Haven through the radio broadcasts. Victoria continued. Some sent scouts. Some sent requests to join. Victoria was careful, selective. But Haven grew. By summer, the population reached 120. New structures appeared. A proper school for the children. A workshop for Nina's expanding mechanical operations. A larger medical facility. Gardens that produced actual harvests. The bus became less central to your daily life. You still maintained it religiously. Still kept it fueled and ready. But days would pass without anyone driving it. Jackson struggled with this more than anyone. One evening, you found him in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. "You okay?" you asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, "I don't know who I am if I'm not moving." "Maybe you're someone who teaches others to move," you suggested. "Maybe that's enough." "Is it?" You didn't have an answer. Nina appeared in the doorway. "Jackson, Victoria needs to see you, all of us actually." The group gathered in Victoria's office, a small room in the farmhouse that served as Haven's administrative center. Victoria looked serious. "I've received a distress call, another settlement. Place called Riverside, about 100 miles east. They've been hit hard by raiders, lost people, lost supplies. They need help." "What kind of help?" Rachel asked. "Medical, mechanical, and—" Victoria paused. "They need evacuation for their wounded and vulnerable. They want to relocate here temporarily, maybe 30 people." She looked at Jackson. "They need transportation. They need the bus." Jackson sat up straighter. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning, if you're willing." The group looked at each other. No. Discussion needed. You'd built this machine for survival, for helping people survive. Of course you were going. Chapter 25. The Rescue Mission. You left at dawn with supplies, medical equipment, an empty space for passengers. The journey to Riverside took 2 days. The roads were rougher in this direction, less traveled, more hazardous. You encountered more dead, more obstacles, more evidence of the world's collapse. Riverside sat along a river valley. Strategic location, good resources, but vulnerable to attack from multiple directions. You arrived to find the settlement in bad shape. Buildings damaged, walls breached, people injured. The raiders had come 3 days earlier, taken what they wanted, killed who they felt like killing, left destruction behind. A woman named Grace led the survivors. She was exhausted, covered in soot and blood that wasn't entirely her own. But her eyes showed fierce determination. "You came," she said when she saw the bus. "Victoria said you would. I didn't believe her." "We're here to help," Elliot said, immediately moving toward the injured. You worked through the day and into the night. Elliot and a local medic treated wounds, infections, trauma. They saved 3 people who would have died without intervention. Nina helped repair critical infrastructure. The water system, a generator, small things that made survival possible. Kenji and Rachel assessed security, helped reinforce what remained of the walls, set up watch rotations. Jackson prepared the bus for passengers, removed equipment, laid down padding, created space for people to sit or lie down. By midnight, you'd done what you could. Grace made the decision. 30 people will come with you to Haven, she said. The wounded, the children, the elderly, the rest of us will stay. Try to rebuild. But we need time. We need safety for those who can't fight. You loaded the bus as dawn approached. It was packed. People sitting shoulder to shoulder, children on laps, the wounded on makeshift stretchers. The bus had never carried this many, never been this heavy. But Nina had calculated the weight. The engine could handle it. Jackson started the engine. The sound was reassuring, powerful, alive. "Ready?" he asked. Behind him, 30 frightened, hopeful faces looked forward. Rachel called from her position near the door. "Let's bring them home." The bus rolled out of Riverside, slow, careful, carrying precious cargo. You were halfway back to Haven when the engine started making a sound it had never made before. Chapter 26. The breakdown. The sound was subtle at first, a slight knocking in the engine. Nina heard it immediately from where she sat in the back, her hand against the metal floor. "Jackson, we have a problem," she called out. Jackson heard it too now. The rhythm was off. The power wasn't consistent. "How bad?" Nina was already moving toward the front, listening, evaluating. "Bad. We need to stop, now." Jackson guided the bus off the road into a clearing, killed the engine. The silence that followed felt ominous. Nina was underneath the bus before anyone else could move. She emerged 15 minutes later, covered in grease and diesel, face grim. "Crankshaft bearing," she said. "It's failing. Maybe failed already. We keep running it. We risk destroying the entire engine." "Can you fix it?" Rachel asked. "Not here. Not without parts I don't have." Nina looked at the packed bus, at the 30 refugees who depended on them. "We're stuck." The group processed this. You were 40 miles from Haven, too far to walk with wounded and children, too far to reach before dark. Kenji spoke first. "I can run back to Haven, make it in maybe 8 hours, bring another vehicle." "The only vehicles at Haven won't carry this many people," Jackson said. "Then we make multiple trips," Rachel said. "Or we radio Haven, have them send a convoy." "Radio range won't reach from here. Victoria had warned you about the terrain blocking signals." Elliot looked at the refugees. Some were sleeping. Some watched with worried eyes. All of them were exhausted, injured, traumatized. They can't wait 8 hours. Some of them need constant care. Nina stared at the bus like it had personally betrayed her. This machine had been her creation, her responsibility, and now it was failing when people needed it most. "There might be another option," Kenji said slowly. "About 10 miles south, there's an old truck stop. I saw it on a map. Pre-outbreak, it would have had a garage, parts, maybe something we could use." "That's a long shot," Rachel said. "It's a shot," Nina replied. "Better than nothing." Jackson made the decision. "Nina and I go to the truck stop. Rest of you stay here. Protect the bus, protect the people. We'll be back by dark." "And if you're not?" Rachel asked. Jackson met her eyes. "Then you do what you have to do to get these people to Haven. Leave the bus if you must." Those words hung in the air. Leave the bus, your home, your fortress, your identity. But survival always came first. Chapter 27. The Truck Stop. Jackson and Nina took a small pack with tools, water, and one handgun. They moved fast, jogging when the terrain allowed, walking quickly when it didn't. The truck stop appeared through the trees just before noon. It was massive, one of those highway complexes that serviced long-haul truckers. Multiple gas pumps, a restaurant, a convenience store, and, critically, an auto repair garage. It was also crawling with the dead, at least 30 of them, wandering the parking lot, trapped in a space they'd been drawn to months ago and never left. "We can't fight through that," Nina said quietly. "Don't have to," Jackson replied. He studied the complex. "The garage is on the far side. If we're quiet, if we move along the tree line, we might reach it without drawing attention." They circled around, moving slowly, deliberately, step calculated. The dead were slow, distracted. One stumbled past within 20 feet, didn't notice them. They reached the garage's side door. Locked, but Nina picked it in 30 seconds. Inside was a time capsule. Tools still hanging on pegboards. Parts organized in bins. Nina went straight to the parts section. Looking for any diesel engine components, bearings especially, cross your fingers. Jackson kept watch at the door. Through the dirty windows he could see the dead shambling aimlessly. For now, they hadn't noticed the intrusion. Nina worked quickly, methodically, pulled bins, checked labels, muttered technical specifications to herself. "Found something," she finally said. "Not exact, but close enough I can make it work." They loaded what they needed into their pack. Nina grabbed additional supplies, oil, filters, spare parts that might be useful. They were almost to the door when they heard it. A crash from the front of the building. Glass breaking. Then moans. The dead had gotten inside. "Back door," Jackson said immediately. They ran through the garage, past vehicle lifts and tool chests, toward the rear exit. Behind them, the moaning grew louder. The dead had caught their scent, their sound, their presence. The back door was chained from outside. "Of course it is," Nina said. She looked around frantically. "Window!" They climbed through a high window, dropped into the loading area behind the building. Started running. The dead poured around the building's corners, slow but inevitable, reaching, always reaching. Jackson and Nina ran. They ran through the forest, through underbrush that tore at clothes and skin. They ran until the moaning faded behind them, until their lungs burned and legs screamed. They ran until they couldn't hear pursuit anymore. They stopped, gasping, checking each other for injuries. Nina held up the pack. "Got what we need." Jackson managed a laugh. Breathless, exhausted, but genuine. "Then let's get back." They reached the bus as the sun touched the horizon. Chapter 28. The Repair. The group's relief at seeing Jackson and Nina return was palpable. "We got it," Nina announced, holding up the bearing like a trophy. She worked through the evening by flashlight. The repair was delicate, technical, and absolutely critical. One mistake would doom the engine completely. Jackson held lights. Rachel fetched tools. Kenji kept watch. Elliot tended to refugees who needed attention. Inside the bus, the Christmas lights glowed softly. Someone had turned them on for comfort. Children slept. Adults whispered prayers or hopes, or just quiet words of encouragement to each other. Nina worked for 3 hours. Her hands were steady despite exhaustion. This was what she knew, what she understood. Machines had rules. Follow the rules, they worked. Finally, she emerged from underneath the bus, covered in grease and dirt, but smiling. "Try it," she said to Jackson. Jackson climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. The sound was clean, strong, right. A cheer went up from inside the bus. Nina wiped her hands and looked at her creation. "You're not done yet," she told it quietly. "Still got work to do." Jackson revved the engine gently, listening, feeling. Everything felt solid. "Haven," he said. "Let's go home." The bus rolled back onto the road, slower than usual, careful with its heavy cargo, but moving, always moving. You reached Haven just after midnight. The gates opened immediately. Victoria and a medical team were waiting. The refugees disembarked slowly, helped by community members. Some cried with relief. Some just stared at Haven like they couldn't believe it was real. Your group stayed with the bus, watching. Rachel updated Victoria on everything. Elliot briefed the medical team. Kenji gave a security report. Jackson sat in the driver's seat. Didn't move. Just sat there, hands on the wheel. Nina climbed in and sat beside him. "Engine held," she said. "You held," Jackson replied. "We all did. Think we can do it again?" Jackson smiled tiredly. "As many times as we have to." Chapter 29. The choice to stay. Summer turned to fall. The rescue mission became one of many. Haven's reputation grew. Communities throughout the region knew about the settlement on the plateau, and they knew about the armored bus and the 5 people who drove it. You became legends, in a small way. The survivors who helped other survivors, who bridged communities, who chose cooperation over isolation. But legends get tired too. One October evening, the group sat inside the bus. You'd just returned from another supply run. Successful, uneventful. Just another day in the new world. "I've been thinking," Jackson said quietly. Everyone looked at him. "Victoria offered me a permanent position, running the transportation division, training drivers, coordinating routes between all the settlements we're connected to now." He paused. It would mean staying here, really staying. Not just winter, but permanently. Nina spoke first. "The bus needs a permanent home, a proper garage. I can't keep doing field repairs forever." "The medical work here is important," Elliot added. "Patricia and I are building something real. An actual healthcare system." Kenji nodded. "The area is mapped, secured. We could do more good helping Haven grow than wandering." Rachel looked around at the bus. The Christmas lights, the sleeping bags, the small trinkets and personal items that had accumulated over months. This was home because we were moving. Because we had each other. But maybe home can be something else now. Jackson took a long breath. "I spent my whole life moving. Always the next highway, the next destination. But somewhere along the way, this bus stopped being about escape. It became about bringing people together, connecting places." He looked at each of them. "I think I'm ready to stop running." The silence that followed was profound. Then Rachel smiled. "I vote We stay. Stay, Nina agreed. Stay, from Elliot. Stay, Kenji finished. Jackson nodded slowly. Then we stay. But the bus stays ours. We maintain it. We keep it ready, because you never know. You never know, everyone agreed. It was decided. Chapter 30. Home. The bus found its final resting place in Haven's new garage, a structure Nina designed specifically to house it. High ceiling, proper lift equipment, storage for parts and supplies. But it wasn't retired. Not exactly. The bus still made runs, still connected communities. But now others drove it too, trained by Jackson. The fortress on wheels became community property, shared resource, symbol of what cooperation could build. Your group evolved with it. Jackson ran the transportation network, coordinating supply routes across 5 settlements. He still drove the bus sometimes when the routes were difficult or dangerous. But he also taught others to do what he'd done for so long. Nina became Haven's chief mechanic. She had apprentices now, people she taught to understand engines and vehicles. The skills that had saved the group were passed on to a new generation. Elliot and Patricia ran a medical center that served not just Haven, but visiting refugees and travelers. They saved lives, they trained others, they built something that would outlast them. Kenji led the Ranger Corps, scouts and guides who kept Haven safe and connected to the world beyond. His knowledge of wilderness and survival became institutional. Rachel coordinated security across all Allied settlements. She built networks, protocols, training programs. She turned individual communities into a cooperative defense system. And you found your place too, in this new world built from the ashes of the old, where an armored school bus had carried 5 strangers into survivors, then friends, then family. The Christmas lights still hang inside the bus. Even parked, even stationary, they glow softly on quiet evenings. Sometimes, late at night, you sit in the driver's seat, just to remember, just to feel the wheel under your hands, just to recall what it was like when the road stretched forever and survival meant constant motion. But then you look out at Haven, at the lights and windows, at the people moving between buildings, at children playing in spaces that used to be dangerous, at gardens growing food and walls keeping danger out. And you realize something. You found what you were searching for all along, not just survival, but purpose, connection, home. The bus brought you here. The road delivered you to exactly where you needed to be. And while the engine stays maintained, ready for whatever comes next, you know the truth. You're not running anymore, you're building. Thank you for journeying with us tonight through this tale of survival, friendship, and finding home in unexpected places. The armored bus may rest in its garage, but the spirit of those 5 survivors reminds us that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's the people you refuse to leave behind, the vehicle that keeps you together, and the choice to keep moving forward no matter what. If you're still awake to listen to another sleepless survival story after this one, what would you like to survive next? Tell us in the comments. And if this story helped you relax, consider it your reminder to like and subscribe. We'll be here, waiting with another journey into survival every time you need to escape into a different world. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, the road always leads somewhere, even when you can't see the destination. Good night.